Welcome back to another episode of the Skinfluence Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dustin Portela, board-certified dermatologist, and today I'm flying solo because I have a topic that's been living rent-free in my head, and honestly, it needs its own episode. No guest, no interruptions, just you, me, and some genuinely alarming information about a peptide that social media has decided is a personality trait. So social media has an obsession, and this one will give you a tan, kill your appetite, and send your libido into overdrive all at the same time. It's called Melanotan II, and it's been nicknamed the Barbie drug, and people are injecting it into themselves in their own bathrooms based on TikTok advice. I'm a dermatologist, and, well, I have some thoughts. Now, before we get into the chaos, and there is chaos, I want to take a moment and talk about why I'm doing an episode on this, because I don't do scare content. That's not what this show is about. I'm not here to catastrophize or be the guy who tells you that everything is dangerous and you should be terrified. That's a different kind of show. What I try to do on every week on this podcast is to help you reclaim your health from people who are profiting off of your confusion. The people who take something real, strip out the nuance, package it with a good filter and a compelling thumbnail, and sell it to you before you've had a chance to ask a single question. Melanotan II is one of those things, and it's kind of having a moment, partly because of social media, and we'll get into that, but also because there's been a legitimate shift in the regulatory landscape around peptides in the U.S. that has brought these compounds back into the conversation in ways that they haven't been for years. So here's the brief version of that. Recently, the FDA moved Melanotan II along with about 18 other peptides from a classification that essentially made them off limits for compounding pharmacies to work with or physicians to prescribe into a category that makes them legally recognizable and prescribable. And that means that compounding pharmacies can work with them again. That's a real thing that happened. But, and I want to be very clear here, that classification change does not mean that these peptides have been clinically approved for any condition. It does not mean that they have been properly tested for long-term safety. It just means that they now exist in a more accessible legal gray zone. Using these peptides regardless of how you source them and regardless of what you've seen on your For You page is something that you do entirely at your own risk. So let's talk about exactly what those risks look like, because I think most people that are using this have no idea what they're putting into their body. Melanotan II is a synthetic peptide, and that means that it is a lab-made chain of amino acids engineered to mimic a hormone that your body produces called alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, or alpha MSH. Your body uses alpha MSH to signal to your skin cells to produce melanin, the pigment that gives your skin color and provides some protection against UV damage. It is a natural process, and it's happening in your body right now, especially as we get into summer. What Melanotan II does is it hijacks that system. It floods your body with a supercharged version of that signal, one that is more potent and longer lasting than what your body naturally produces. Now here's where I need you to pay close attention, because this is the part that makes Melanotan II fundamentally different from what most people think that they're taking. Melanotan II is not selective. It does not just find the tanning receptor, do its job, and then go home. It can bind to a whole family of receptors in your body called melanocortin receptors. Specifically, the MT2 peptide can bind to MC1, MC3, MC4, and MC5, and each one of those receptors does something a little bit different. The MC1 receptor activation is what causes you to get a tan, and that's really the one that most people are after when they take this peptide. However, MC4 receptor activation can cause intense flushing, nausea, and in some cases, spontaneous erections in men. Yes, really, we're going to come back to that one with some case reports a little bit later. Now, MC2 and MC3 receptors can affect appetite suppression, fatigue, and gastrointestinal symptoms like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. And because Melanotan II can actually cross the blood-brain barrier, it's not just affecting your skin, it's also affecting your central nervous system, your appetite regulation, your sexual function, your cardiovascular response. So for the people marketing this, they figured out, well, it gives you a tan, it kills your hunger, and it increases your libido. They thought, let's call it the Barbie drug and sell it on the internet, which is kind of genius marketing, honestly. But the safety profile is definitely not. Melanotan II is most commonly used as a subcutaneous injection, meaning that people are injecting it with small needles into their abdomen. And the second formulation that's gained a lot of traction recently is a nasal spray version. And we'll talk about a very important case report involving the nasal spray later in this episode. Now, in both cases, these products are purchased online, usually in a lipophilized powder, meaning it's a dry powder that users have to reconstitute with bacteriostatic water themselves and then calculate their own dosing. There's no standardization. There's no label telling you exactly how much to use. People are just figuring this out from forums and from TikTok comments. And the products are not FDA approved for human use. Many of them are actually labeled not for human consumption, which is a legal loophole that black market sellers on the internet use to avoid regulation while knowing full well that the person buying it is going to inject it into themselves. The Swedish Poisons Information Center, which has been tracking adverse events related to Melanotan II since 2008, logged 215 cases of people calling in about side effects in just over a decade. That's just one country, and that number is almost certainly dramatically undercounting the actual use and the incidence of side effects. Let me walk you through what the actual side effect profile looks like, because this is not what people selling this on the internet are telling you. Now, the common stuff. What most people experience will be some nausea, stomach cramps, facial flushing, fatigue, and decreased appetite. These are essentially the expected side effects, and most users will experience at least some of them. And in men, spontaneous erections within 1 to 5 hours of injection. This is not a rare occurrence. It's a known, documented pharmacological effect of MC4 receptor activation. It is baked into the mechanism of the drug. There's also something called the yawning and stretching complex. And it's actually something people report, and even though it sounds kind of benign and almost funny, it tells you that this is a central nervous system effect, that the compound is doing a lot more than just tanning your skin. Now, there are some long-term cosmetic effects beyond tanning, and that can include something we call melanonychia, and that is a brown to black discoloration of your fingernails and or toenails. And of course, the darkening and the appearance of new moles, which brings us to the section that I really want you to pay attention to as a dermatologist. We're going to go through a few case reports. So let me tell you about some of the specific cases published in the medical literature, because statistics are one thing, but I want you to hear actual patient stories, because then something inside us shifts a little bit. At least that's my hope. The first case is about something called rhabdomyolysis, and this is when your muscle tissue breaks down and releases proteins into your bloodstream, overwhelming the function of your kidneys, and it can actually cause acute kidney failure. In this specific case, a 39-year-old man injected 6 milligrams of Melanotan II that he purchased online. That is 6 times more than the recommended starting dose. But again, there really is no regulated dosing, so people are often guessing based on what they read on forums. He was in the ER 2 hours after his injection with diffuse body aches, sweating, tachycardia, or a rapid heartbeat, peaking at about 146 beats per minute. He also had mydriasis, or dry eyes, diffuse muscle tremors. Now, they took his labs, and his CPK, which is a marker of muscle damage, started at 1,760, and 12 hours later, it was up over 17,000. To give you an idea, a normal range for your CPK is under 200. This can be a life-threatening condition. Thankfully, this patient survived, but he did spend 3 days in the ICU. There's also case reports about renal infarction. That's essentially a stroke of the kidneys, when the blood supply to the kidney is cut off, and case reports have suggested that this has happened in Melanotan II users thought to be related to the vasoconstriction that the drug might cause through sympathetic nervous system overstimulation. The mechanism involves the drug narrowing the blood vessels to cut off the perfusion to the kidney. This is potentially life-threatening, and it's often misdiagnosed initially because it's so rare. And then we have to talk about priapism. There have been multiple published case reports of Melanotan II causing priapism in men. That is a painful, sustained erection that requires medical intervention. You hear the commercials online about Viagra or Cialis back when those were running, where they say if you experience an erection lasting longer than 4 hours, seek immediate medical attention. Well, listen to these case reports to put that into perspective with Melanotan II. A 55-year-old man had been using Melanotan II for 6 years. 6 years without incident. He knew the drug, he knew his dose, and he injected just 2 milligrams, a relatively small dose for an experienced user, and within hours he developed a sustained, painful erection. By the time that he arrived at the emergency department, it had already been going on for 30 hours. He failed cavernosal aspiration, meaning they have to insert a needle into his genitals and try to pull the blood out. That failed. He failed maximum dose phenylephrine injection, so again, another needle, and he ultimately required surgical intervention. 30 hours, and that was after 6 years of using it without a problem, as far as we know. There's another title of a case report in the British Medical Journal about priapism, and I'm not making this up. It's one of the funniest titles I've seen of a published paper. Melanotan II induced priapism, a hard-earned tan. Now, in this particular case, the patient avoided surgery, but he presented to the emergency department when his priapism had been going on for over 20 hours. This is not just a side effect. This is a medical emergency that can result in permanent injury. Now, although he avoided surgery, at his 4-week follow-up, he had still not regained erectile function. Serious, serious stuff. Now that we've covered the acute toxicity, the kidney issues, the surgical complications, which all of that is a big deal, I want to spend some real time on the part that concerns me the most as a dermatologist, because this is fundamentally my area, and it's where I feel the most urgency is about making sure that people understand what we know about melanotan. There are multiple published case reports linking Melanotan II use to the development of melanoma, and I want to walk through several of them because they tell a story together. The first case involves a 20-year-old woman who was a Fitzpatrick skin type 2, which means fair-skinned. She did a 3 to 4 week course of Melanotan II injections, combining them with tanning bed use. She was then referred to a dermatology clinic because there was a suspicious lesion on her gluteal region, which they decided to excise, and it turned out to be melanoma. This was with only 3 to 4 weeks of use, and again, she's 20 years old. Case number 2 was a 42-year-old woman who had been seeing her dermatologist annually for years. She had totally unremarkable follow-ups every single time, nothing concerning year after year. In her case, she did a short 1-week course of Melanotan II injections, and about 3 months later, a pre-existing mole on her abdomen had changed significantly. Many new moles had also appeared or darkened. The changing nevus on her abdomen was biopsied and turned out to be a 0.3 millimeter melanoma. Still a pretty early melanoma, but a very concerning diagnosis. This was from a mole that had been watched and cleared every single year. Case number 3 was a 23-year-old woman with red hair, fair skin, and a family history of melanoma. She started using melanotan for about 3 years and subsequently developed 3 synchronous melanomas. The first was on her back, the second was on her abdomen, and the third was on her right arm. She then underwent genetic testing and found that she had a mutation in 2 genes. One was the MC1R gene, and the second was something called the CDKN2A. This particular gene, CDKN2A, is a tumor suppressor gene, and variants of it are associated with a significantly elevated lifetime risk of melanoma. Now, she didn't know that she had that before she started injecting melanotan. No one told her that melanotan might increase her risk of melanoma. Case number 4 was about a 16-year-old girl who was self-injecting Melanotan II and attending a UV tanning studio. She was then referred to her GP because many of her moles had darkened significantly and were potentially malignant. Again, 16 years old. This is not something that a teenager should be doing. Not to beat a dead horse, but here's case number 5, a 22-year-old woman using the nasal spray formulation. This was just published in 2025. While using the nasal spray formulation, she developed a mass in her anterior maxilla, or inside her mouth, her upper jaw area. Histological analysis after biopsy confirmed that this was mucosal malignant melanoma, and she underwent surgical resection followed by ongoing immunotherapy for a potentially life-threatening case of melanoma linked to Melanotan II. And critically, this is the first case that's involving the nasal spray version of Melanotan II. Now, this suggests that the route of administration may not limit the risk the way that some people have assumed. And I want to be scientifically honest with you guys because that's what I built this show on. Causality has not been definitively proven. These are just case reports, and they show an association, but not necessarily causation. There was a 2013 review that found no conclusive evidence that Melanotan II directly causes melanoma. And a 2021 review concluded that the elevated melanoma risk observed in Melanotan users could potentially be explained by the fact that using this drug tended to also be done in patients who were seeking UV exposure more aggressively, like going outside to get a tan or using tanning beds. Now, all of the reported melanoma cases involved individuals with additional risk factors like fair skin, tanning bed use, personal or family history of melanoma. But here's what I keep coming back to as a dermatologist every time that I review this literature. Melanotan II directly and powerfully stimulates the melanocytes, and those are the exact cells that can become melanoma. As one of the researchers put it, if you stimulate pigment cells enough, you can cause abnormal proliferation, and that abnormal proliferation is how melanoma starts. We are potentially pouring gasoline on a fire that may or may not already exist in someone's skin, and we have no way of knowing in advance which situation any given person is in. There's something that's especially worth highlighting in that third case, the young woman with the MC1R and the CDKN2A variants. She did have a genetic profile that put her at elevated risk, and she had no idea. Most people don't get genetic testing before they start experimenting with peptides that they find online. Most people have no idea what their melanoma risk profile looks like, and Melanotan II is not selective about who it affects. Now, even short of melanoma, the dermatological literature is full of case reports documenting rapid and concerning mole changes in Melanotan II users. And I want to mention these specifically because if you or someone you know is using this drug, these are the warning signs. A 25-year-old man suddenly developed multiple new moles and rapid transformation of his existing moles within weeks of a 4-week course of Melanotan II. Another 24-year-old bodybuilder reported the eruption of multiple new moles and darkening of pre-existing ones within 24 hours of a single injection of Melanotan II. A 19-year-old woman using tanning beds alongside the drug developed eruptive nevi, or just an explosion of new moles. A 30-year-old and a 48-year-old woman both had pre-existing moles transform into severely dysplastic moles. That essentially means these had many features of melanoma, but didn't quite cross the threshold to become melanoma when they were biopsied and examined under the microscope. When I look at the pattern across all of these cases, there's a few things that stand out. Nearly all of them have Fitzpatrick skin types 1 or 2, so pretty fair skin. Nearly all of them have multiple pre-existing moles. Many of them have personal or family history of melanoma or regular tanning bed use. And the mole changes, when they occur, they can happen fast within days or weeks. So if you are using Melanotan II and you notice moles changing, darkening, enlarging, or new ones appearing, that is not a cosmetic effect. That is the drug working, and it's a sign that you should be evaluated by a dermatologist immediately. I want to add one more layer to this because I think it gets underemphasized in the conversations about Melanotan II, and that is the problem with the product itself, separate from the pharmacology. Everything that I've described so far assumes that you're actually getting Melanotan II. And the reality is you might not be, or you might be getting it at a concentration or purity level that you have no way to verify. These products that are sold by quote-unquote research companies are not always manufactured under any regulatory oversight. They're not tested for sterility, purity, or accurate concentration. They're sold as powders, and the user has to reconstitute that powder, calculate their own dose, and inject it under the skin, and dosing errors are extremely common. The overdose case that I described earlier, the man with rhabdomyolysis who ended up in the ICU, he ended up taking 6 times the recommended starting dose. Probably not because he was reckless, but because the recommended dose comes from an internet forum, not from a prescribing physician with a standardized formulation. Now, if you're sourcing it from a compounding pharmacy under physician supervision, following the recent FDA reclassification, that is a bit of a different conversation, but it's still not without its risks. But if you're buying it from a website that ships it to your door with no medical oversight and a label that says not for human use, you are genuinely in uncharted territory and not in an exciting way. So let me give you some concrete guidance here, because I don't want to just scare you and leave you without something actionable. First, if you are currently using Melanotan II, please see a dermatologist and get a full skin check. Not because I'm assuming the worst, but because case reports that we have suggest that mold changes can occur rapidly, and catching melanoma early changes everything about the outcome. I have had patients come in who tell me that they're using Melanotan II. Of course, I recommend that they stop, but I can't make them stop, and so we document their moles closely and agree to regular follow-up. The second thing I will say here is that if you have any of the following risk factors, I want you to pay special attention. A Fitzpatrick skin type of 1 or 2. That means that you burn easily and you have very fair skin. If you have a personal or family history of melanoma, a history of many moles or atypical moles, or a known genetic variation in the MC1R or CDKN2A gene. If you have heavy tanning bed use in your past. If any of that describes you, you are in the highest risk category based on the case report literature. And Melanotan II, in my opinion, is genuinely not worth it. Now, the third thing that I want to say, if you're a clinician listening to this, the literature is clear that we need to start asking our patients about this. When someone comes in with a sudden eruption of new moles or existing moles changing rapidly, or a tan that seems too dark for their skin type or that time of year, Melanotan II should be on your differential. Ask directly. Patients won't always volunteer it. And fourth, if you or someone you love is experiencing prolonged or painful erection after using Melanotan II, this is a medical emergency. Go to the emergency department. Do not wait. The window for conservative treatment is really narrow, and a delay can result in permanent injury or dysfunction. I want to close out with something that I think a lot about and that I hope resonates with you if you've been listening to Skinfluence for a while. The illness industrial complex, which is the phrase that I use for the ecosystem of people and companies that profit from keeping you confused, anxious, and reaching for the next thing that promises to fix you. It doesn't always look like a pharmaceutical company or a sketchy supplement brand. Sometimes it looks like someone with perfect lighting, a great tan, posting on TikTok. Someone telling you that a drug is safe based on their personal experience without any training, without any accountability, without any awareness of a 22-year-old who used the nasal spray of that same drug and developed oral mucosal melanoma. That's a real person. I mean, that case report was published in 2025, so she's still navigating melanoma right now. I do get the appeal of Melanotan II, genuinely. A tan without sun damage, appetite suppression, increased libido. That's an extraordinary marketing proposition. And if it were safe and regulated and tested, maybe there would be a real conversation to have about it, but it's just not. It's an unlicensed, incompletely tested compound with documented links to melanoma, kidney failure, rhabdomyolysis, and the need for surgical intervention, being sold as a powder on the internet to people who are reconstituting it in their bathrooms. Your health belongs to you, and part of owning your health is knowing when something is genuinely not worth the risk. This is one of those things. You are beautiful exactly as you are, with or without a tan. Now that's going to do it for today, for this solo episode of Skinfluence. If this episode gave you something useful, share it. Send it to someone in your life who maybe has seen the TikToks, because I promise you that person exists in your circle of friends. Maybe they haven't seen this. And a 5-minute conversation about what Melanotan II actually does could genuinely matter. So if you have questions, if you want to dig deeper into any of the case reports that I reference, send me a message on Instagram. You know where to find me. I'm Dr. Dustin Portela, and I'm trying to help you reclaim your health from the people that are profiting off of your confusion. I'll see you in the next episode.